To our January 12th, 2024 interview for Director of School meeting. Tonight, we are interviewing Dr. Myles Hebrard. We're glad to have you here. We want to thank you for coming. The way we're doing this interview process, we have questions that were determined based on the characteristics at a community interview decided were the most important characteristics for a new director of schools. So we're going to divide these up among each other, and there's 2 rounds, but we'll take a break after the first one.
Awesome. Thank you.
Is there anything you want to tell us about that was not on your resume? Because we've had a chance to review that part, but if there's any additional information you want us to know.
First, I'd just like to say thank you to the Dickson County Board of Education and also to TSBA for selecting me as one of the 4 finalists. I'd also like to say congratulations to Dr. Sutherland, Dr. Duke, and to Mr. Hawley. Congratulations for making to a finalist state, because this is a big deal. And this is a big decision by 6 members of a Board of Education. You 6 will get the ultimate vote. But those that are watching online, those that are in the audience today, will obviously have a voice and probably reach out to you. So I just wanted to say congratulations to each of them. I had the opportunity today to be able to meet with 2 of those candidates and express that gratitude towards them, because that is a big step by putting your name out there and everything becomes public. So I also want to be able to share with my resume. You obviously have had an opportunity to review that. And you notice that there are several things on there that I've been a service learning coordinator. I've been a teacher for 5 years. I was a principal of the largest elementary school for 7 years. I was a supervisor of special education for 6 years. I've been a director of schools now for 2.5 years. I've also been an encourager. I've been a leadership coach. I also coach Upward right now. But I think some of the most proud things that I can share that are not on my resume is that I've been married for 15 years to my wife, and we have 2 sons. And so not only am I a husband, but I'm also a dad. And so my sons are 11 and 13, and that's probably one of the proudest things that I can share. That never usually makes it on a resume, but sometimes you can read into that. It's been interesting the last couple of weeks, I would suggest to you, after the finalists were named. And, you know, as you are well aware with social media and all the availability of everything online, how many people try to check you out, how many people request you. Had multiple requests for friendships or Facebook requests, including students. And so I have not accepted any of those, because as you will find out that I don't have any students on my Facebook for a reason, even in my current situation. And so I always do my due diligence on that. But I'll leave you with this. I'm going to give you some guiding principles, and then we can get started with all of your questions. And so here are some guiding principles for me. First, you must show up. You must work hard. You need to do it right the first time, even when nobody is looking. You need to give it your best effort for number 2. No matter how good you think you are, you can always be better each day. And I strive to be that way. You need to be your biggest cheerleader. This world is a dog-eat-dog world. And if you don't know how to encourage yourself or to build yourself up, you're going to struggle with that. You need to listen. As Covey would say, seek first to understand before being understood. But I would also go on and say, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And then the 5th principle that I would probably share with you is that we're always going to be stronger when we're working together. And so I'm going to start you with those 5 guiding principles, because I look forward to your questions tonight and answering those to the best of my ability. And so I look forward to that. I know I'm in a unique position because I'm the only candidate that has right now the experience as director of schools. And so as those questions come, I expect that you will analyze those in a different manner, because I should have some of those experiences. So thank you for the opportunity. Happy to be here tonight.
Thank you. My first question for you. What will you do to create an atmosphere in the schools that will lead to educational excellence for all students?
I think the first thing that if you were to talk to my school system right now, I have literally taken the lid off the top of the jar, turned it upside down and said, let's make it happen. Unfortunately, there are times when doors have been closed in certain systems. And by taking the lid off the top of the jar, it doesn't mean it's an open checkbook. It doesn't mean that we get to just do what we want. It's a free for all. There are guidelines for that. But I would also say that the celebrations, some of those traditions, some of those recognitions of staff and students is very important. And those traditions must continue in those school systems. So if we're doing assemblies for 9-week grades, or if we're recognizing students of the month or staff of the month or volunteers of the month, those things must continue. If we're doing homecomings, those things must continue. Those are part of the school culture. When an elementary school says, let's have a pajama day, I just want to be invited. All right. So those things are very important when you're building school culture. And I think sometimes with new leadership, there's an opportunity to be able to explore things that have never been seen from the lens of being always inside. And I'm not criticizing any leader that has been here previously or that will be here in the future, but every leader brings a different aspect to a system or to a company.
Thank you. What do you consider to be the major strengths that you would bring to this position?
I prided myself when I got into administration. This is my 16th year in administration. I prided myself on trying to be the most accessible and most visible administrator that you have ever encountered. With that, I'll share you those experiences so that I can prove that I've been there. When I was an elementary principal for 7 years, I unloaded the buses. If I was at the school building, I unloaded the buses every morning. I unloaded cars. I helped load cars. Because that visibility and that accessibility helped to sometimes, one, welcome a child as they entered the school. Because as you know, as they get off the buses and sometimes out of the car, they've had a rough morning at home. Maybe they didn't get something they wanted. Maybe mom or dad or grandparent just ruffled them out of bed and shoved them in the car, screaming, yelling. You were that calm voice. And so that accessibility and that visibility helped, I think, to develop a culture before those students walked up those 7 steps into my elementary school. That accessibility also helped that if a parent had a concern, a lot of times it never even got inside my building because they knew they could catch me on that front curb and they could just say, hey, can you check into that for me? And so that anger or that frustration or that mad parent may have never even entered into the front doors of my school because I caught it on the front end and was able to investigate and explore. As a supervisor of special ed, my office was similar to like your setup here. It was separate from the schools. We had 9 schools in Oak Ridge City system. And my goal was to visit 2 schools each day, unless I had a long IEP or unless I had a conference. And again, being visible and accessible for your staff and for those principals was huge because how are you ever going to know what the obstacles are inside classrooms or inside schools if you're never a part of that? Today, I serve as director of schools. To tell you about accessibility and visibility, I'll just share a couple of ideas and a couple of things that I do. Currently, I have no office. I gave my office up to the CTE director. Last year, I served as interim principal. I had to remove somebody so that I could, and I did not find a candidate that I felt qualified for what I was looking for. So I served as interim principal to clean up a couple of things, and I'll share a couple of those with probably in a further question. I developed a conference room, and so if I meet with people, I usually meet in a conference style, very comfortable with that. Today, I have a podium in the front of the high school, and I have a desk in the elementary hallway because that's where I stand or that's where I sit. I greet children every morning as part of the safety team and observing doors with the new law. And so it is an expectation of mine to be the most visible and the most accessible. I also serve as the scorekeeper and the announcer for the high school and middle school basketball teams. I ran the clock for the middle school football. But all those things, it sounds like you serve as a principal, but in my role and in my small community, I've been blessed with the opportunity to be at all those events, not just sporting, but theater or Beta, or all those other organizations and all those things that our kids do. That's important to me. The other things that I feel like that I would bring is being a problem solver. There's no need to sweat under pressure. Again, if you'll listen and try to understand what the problem is, there can be a resolution. I'm not going to say that everybody's going to agree when that problem needs to be solved, but if it's for child benefit and it's in the best interest of the child, it will be the right solution. And the fourth thing that I would share with you is that I feel like I'm a community builder. I think that's built upon the fact that I am the most accessible and most visible administrator. And so sometimes helping the community to bridge gaps, helping to overcome communication barriers or strongholds or political fallouts. All those things come into play. And I feel like that your next director of schools needs to be somebody who can unite this community and help to build that to the next level.
Thank you.
I got a follow-up. Question number 2, you gave us several things about building culture in your answer. Is that culture is what you're telling us is going to bring educational excellence to the students?
I would suggest to you that if you don't have the right culture in your building, the academic side and or your teacher retention is not going to be there. If you have a struggling culture that is unwelcoming, you're not going to succeed in anything. Academic excellence, teacher retention, celebrations, recognition. So thank you for following up on that.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that.
Dr. Hebrard, thank you for being with us tonight. You mentioned as part of your 5 principles, one of those being listening. And additionally, you talked about problem solving and talked about listening. The community felt like the number one aspect or criterion that they would like to see in a director of school is someone with exceptional listening skills with a commitment to accessibility and an open door policy. So what evidence can you cite to show that you are a good listener?
I would suggest to you that when I became the elementary principal in 2008, the superintendent had called me in the office. I had a great classroom, and honestly, if they never talked me into admin, I probably would still be teaching today. I felt like I was king of the world. I had an extreme makeover program that had made it to the national level. I was teaching aerospace, pre-engineering. Everything we built, we blew up. So every kid that struggled with English or math was in my room. And I loved it because those kids were engaged with me. From that, I was placed as the largest elementary school principal in 2008. I was, 35 years old at that time? I had teachers with more teaching experience in that building than I was years old. So to counter that, and to be thoughtful on this particular question, one of the things, a tradition that I had started then, and I actually did it as a supervisor and as a director, is that I did an activity. So the opening staff meeting, I'll hand you 3 note cards. The first one's going to ask every staff member to write down everything you love or everything you like about this district or our school. In that case, it was our school, Claxton Elementary. They'll go through, write down everything they like, everything they love. And I'll have 3 or 4 people share out what they like, what they love. Again, I'm new to it, so don't necessarily always know that. Next note card, put that one to the side. The next note card is that for 5 minutes, I want you to work on everything that you dislike. I try to stop short of the word hate, okay? But what is it that you dislike about the school or the district, your particular school? When I was a supervisor, I had 9 schools that I served. They would write down the things that they disliked. I'd have them share out. Obviously, sometimes when you give somebody an opportunity to say, what do I dislike? Sometimes that list can just grow. They want a second note card. Okay. But again, what are we digging for? Are we digging for dirt or are we digging for gold? All right. What are we looking for? And so it's part of a leadership piece. All right. And an experience for even staff members to understand that if you look for the good, you'll find the good. But if you dig for the bad, you'll always find the bad. The third piece, and this was probably the most challenging piece, was that I gave you an opportunity to tell me what you liked or you loved and tell me what you disliked. The third piece was this. What is it that you're going to do? What is it that you're going to do that you're going to take ownership in to help us to get better? Now you got to put skin in the game. So if you're going to say, well, I don't like that teacher down the hall. I don't like that coach. I don't like turf on the field or grass on the field, whatever it is. I'll give you an opportunity to put those complaints right there on that piece of paper because that's where it's going to sit. But I also want you as a member of my staff, an important member, whether you're a certified teacher, a classified staff, a custodian, a cafeteria employee, a bus driver, no matter what role you served, you were very important. What is it that you're going to own and that you're going to do? From that, I took all those lists, I typed them all up, everything that people said. So then I had knowledge of what everybody said, typed up in a nice email, everything we love, big long list, everything dislike, big long list, everything we said we're going to own, big long list, gave it to every staff member. That has been my driver in my last 3 stops right now and checking off the list. Because again, those things that we like or love are things that sometimes we shouldn't try to get rid of, because those are important and why people stay and why people love to come to work every day. This is a purpose. We're on a mission to make a difference in these kids' lives. And so why take that away from some of these staff members? And so to share an experience about listening, that's probably one of the biggest ones that I have done, that activity. And so it's interesting and it's fun each year because we can go back and look at that and check off several more. And it's fun when you get some victories, especially when you change a culture and dislikes. An example that I'll share in my current district right now, a dislike that was probably on there 10 times, was that in my district, we only got paid once a month. And I understand that's where you are. I met with your finance team today. We only got paid once a month. Staff disliked that. We worked hard last year to get us to twice a month. It isn't any more tax dollars, even though some staff think the more checks you get, the more taxes that get taken out. We were able to utilize their voice to make a change. Now staff love it. All right. And that just happened to be something they said. I've read through some of your community profile. And there are some themes, obviously. You have some things that people really love in Dickson County, and you have some things that are really big challenges. And so it's similar to that activity, but I did it with just 3 note cards. And the other aspect that I would say that I'm a good listener is that I don't have a door right now. So when you talk about an open door policy, I'm standing in a hallway or sitting in a hallway. So
Understood. So, thank you. If you will, give us an example of when you've changed your mind and taken a different course of action as a result of listening to others.
I would say this goes back all the way. I'll use it in my current role, but I would say this goes all the way back to my teaching days. It's always nice when a superintendent or a director of schools proposes to a board or a county commission or a city council and says, I'd like to give my staff an X% raise, a percent raise. Okay, some type of raise. Who's not going to complain about a raise? Everybody loves more money. It's never going to be enough, but everybody loves more money. My challenge is that when I was a teacher making $25,000, $30,000 and you get a 2% raise, working your tail end off because you're new, you're green, and you don't want to disappoint a principal or anybody else in your district, that 2% equals what, $600? Who benefits the most on a percentage raise? It's usually those that are in the upper positions, that have been there with the most years of experience and or in leadership opportunities. I'm not saying that there's not a benefit to those. So one of the things that I feel like that I have listened to and that I had an opportunity to affect change based on what I had been listening to all those years that I was not in charge of proposing to a board, was that I made a switch from percent to flat rate. So when I started 2.5 years ago, my starting salary at a BS0 was $38,000. The governor obviously made a proposal that in 3 years, we're going to be at $50,000 for starting at a BS0. So last year I did $2,000 to get us to 40. Because we were supposed to be at 40 last year. And then this year we're supposed to be at 42. So I was able to get us at 42.5. What that does, BS zeros love that. The problem is that if you increase by 2 or 2,500, the zero, the next 7 steps in the BS are impacted because they're making more than the next 7 steps. And so I was able to work with my board in doing a flat rate across every line item or every, career line right there, which costs money. But I feel like that the staff valued the fact that I fought for everybody. I know you all have a 25 and a 30-year bump. We stopped at 20. Most districts do stop at 20, and bless you all for offering that for those that have been at your district a long time. That's important. But to add $2,000 or to add $2,500 to each of those was huge. And I also did the same for coaching supplements, because my thought was this: if I had a young head coach and it was a percentage, take football for instance, let's say it was at 14%. An experienced person with 20 or 30 years of education might get $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 based on that percent. But that new person that comes in and wants to coach, starting at that minimum salary, that 14% isn't as high, but yet that young coach is working just as hard as that more experienced coach was. I'm not going to say they're going to get more wins or more losses. Don't know that. Again, you got to show up on the field. But I would say that one of the things to your question is the fact that on salaries, by listening, I feel like that I was able to make an impact by going from percent to flat.
Okay, thank you. So in your administration, what avenues are open for you to listen to the concerns of employees, students, parents, and the community? And how would you plan to have or make time available for all involved?
So something that I learned, I guess, 9 years ago when I moved over to Oak Ridge Schools was that Outlook calendar. It just happens to be the email account that we used. And I used to say, because my executive directors were big on this, if it's not on my calendar, then it didn't happen. And I went away from, I used to have those old planner books where you scratched out, dates and times and all those things. And now everything that is on a calendar is on my phone. Who sets that is usually two people. That's myself, and that's my administrative assistant. There's an old saying that you may know where you're at, and God may know what you're doing. But if your secretary don't know where you're at or what you're doing, you and God better be good friends. Okay? So my administrative assistant in this position and my previous position have access to my calendar, because there is no secrets on my calendar. All right. Now, I had to teach myself, because I would go visit two schools when I was in Oak Ridge. I would have to teach myself to block off a time called office hours, so that my administrative assistant knew I would be in there for those 2 hours or that 1 hour chunk of time. And you have to intentionally set that, because sometimes you can get yourself into wanting to go visit all these kids or getting engaged with different activities and programs, and you forget to go take care of the person who's taking care of you when they need things signed, when they've got questions about equipment or checks and things like that. And so I would suggest to you, Outlook is very huge to me right now, or having that online calendar, having the availability for somebody to populate that. So if somebody does want to come and meet, or somebody does want to come and talk, that my secretary or my administrative assistant knows, hey, he's got some availability at X time. I would also suggest that in the SPED world, and in that lifetime, I developed a parent advisory council that was so important to me, to have at least one parent from every school of the 9. I had my teachers select 2, but one, I always wanted to make sure one was there. Now, in an advisory council, it's very important that you drive that discussion. You make yourself available so that at some point you can have a sidebar and talk about concerns. But those meetings were never about individual students with disabilities. Those meetings were about, hey, what does SLPs do? What does OT do? What does PT do? What is a behavior specialist? How can they benefit your child? And so I drove the agenda of a parent advisory council by putting resources in front of them, so that they could ask good questions that might help their son or daughter, whether it be at home, whether it be at school, or somewhere in the community. I would also suggest to you that I learned, and I had this in my first year, it's called a superintendent staff advisory. In a small system like mine, it's going to be staff from certain, just so you don't have everybody at the table. So I would have, a K2 teacher, a 3-5 teacher, a 6-8 teacher, and a couple from the high school. You have a representation. In my previous district, my superintendent had at least one member of the school, and it was an opportunity to be able to come and share concerns that are going on in that school. When you have multiple schools, sometimes you don't know what's always going on, but if you can get it from the lens of the person who gets to come and share. And so I think that has to be afforded to a member of each of the schools, but it can't be punitive. Just because they're the messenger, Doesn't mean they're delivering it, doesn't mean they're the ones with the complaint. But it also helps to narrow down at some point so that you don't get 50,000 emails about something that, hey, we've got a concern about drop off at elementary school. We all like car rider lines, don't we? Okay. Or maybe it's X is going on at the high school or something's going on at the middle school. There's an issue at the alternative school, whatever it is, we can share those, but then you can also drive what that discussion looks like. So I think all those avenues, besides board meetings, obviously being open to the public, being available at all these different activities that these students and or staff are engaged in, being present and being visible, being accessible are, I think, all opportunities for that particular question.
Understood. Lastly, how would you incorporate into your administration the inclusivity of different diverse groups into the listening part of your leadership and administration?
I think that, again, by having members from each of the different schools, you're offering the principals an opportunity to make sure that you do have a diverse group so that you are listening to the needs of each of the different communities. I think that's very important. But I would also suggest that by being part of civic organizations and making yourself visible there, because there are different men and women who are in the different organizations, whether it be the Lions Club, the Optimist Club, the Rotary Clubs. There's several clubs that are very important to communities. And I think that when you start meeting with business people or industry people or teachers or students, those are all I can consider all of those to be diverse groups that are very important to be heard.
Thank you.
Dr. Hebrard, I want to start by thanking you for applying and for being here. I don't think the average person understands what's involved whenever you stick yourself out. And it's one of the few jobs in the world where you're going to be interviewed in front of 6 strangers, a number of people in an audience, and countless numbers that are watching televised. So you put yourself out there for us, and I appreciate that. Thank you for being here. I have criteria number 2, the second on the list of the items that the public asks us to address on the director. And they look for a director who will speak and write effectively to communicate the successes as well as the needs of the school system. So I have 2 questions under that category. The first one, what evidence can you cite to demonstrate you are an effective communicator?
I would suggest to you in my role right now, the board meetings are probably the most of the biggest, one of my biggest things, because obviously those are open to the public. And so having experience presenting in front of a board and preparing for those board meetings is very important to me, because number one, you never know who's going to show up at a board meeting. Somebody may sign up to get on the agenda for public comment of an item on the agenda. And or somebody may come and share a concern with the board. And so you have to be prepared professionally to be able to answer to all those things. And I think that as a director, I know that, I think one of the candidates today said, would you rather had the questions or not? And I said to him, as a director of schools, you better be able to prepared to be able to speak at any time, because a news camera might show up in your face. A member of the community might ask a question, and you better be prepared to be able to have a response. You don't always have to have the answer. I will share with you that in this room right now with the people that are here, or the people online, or the people I work with right now, I am not the smartest person in any of those rooms, okay? I am blessed to be able to be surrounded by awesome professionals and individuals who are much smarter than me, and together we make a district look really good. All right. So board meetings are number 1. I would also say community meetings, whether it be a chamber event, whether it be a civic organization, whether it be speaking at a church, whatever function I think is important, because again, if you want to sell your message and drive your vision, then you better get out on the front of that, and you better communicate that so that people don't assume what you are or what you are not, what you're about. So I think those are very important. I also think being present at different events and different functions when children and parents are involved. Okay. Some of the things that, and this may cross over, but, some of the things I think about are muffins with moms or donuts with dads. My research was done on the impacts of father involvement. Do you know how many children starve to have a male in their life? And there's also those children who starve to have a female in their life, a parent, a real parent. And so by being at those events, you make yourself available to be able to communicate to the needs, and it usually prevents more problems from coming inside your school. And so I think all of those are very important in terms of communication. I would also share that I do a weekly bulletin. It started with my board. I know that there's a question about how do you communicate. I do a weekly bulletin, but one of the things that I started as tradition, I started 3 years ago, and I send it out every Friday. Mine went out this morning. We did have school just like you all had school, but I do a senior spotlight and I highlight one of my seniors, because you know how I got to know every kid's name in the building? You do an interview, you go sit at lunch with those kids, you get little fingerprints and mouth prints, because if you're having a bad day, go down to elementary school, you get one hug, you're going to get 20 hugs. And it's the best feeling on that. And so when you're present, when parents are watching their babies, I think that you're showing that you can be an effective communicator.
Thank you. Number 2, what have you done to help the public understand the needs and successes of your school system?
I would say this: if you don't ask, you won't get. And I've always been a big believer of that. If you're unwilling to ask, then you will never know if you could have succeeded in that. And so I would suggest to you, by having an open door policy, by being present, by attending not only my children's things who go to the same school as the children that I'm the director of schools at, it's very important that, you start planting seeds. And it's important that you plant those seeds early, even though I may be a year out. How do you think I got an agriculture agriculture program in Hollow Rock, Brewston? It happened because we planted seeds with the right people. We're in an agriculture area that school system is, and ag can be a blessing and a benefit to so many students in so many school districts in rural areas. And it began by planting seeds. We're putting up a greenhouse. Soon will be a barn. And it would have never happened had we never asked or just planted those seeds with those people.
Thank you.
I'm going to address you as Dr. H. That's what you said at
Thank you, sir.
dinner. Criterion 3, third major question that our communities had was, we're looking for someone who has the wisdom to know when change is necessary and the ability and determination to generate that change, even in the face of opposition. So describe a significant change you initiated in your district or school system and tell what evidence you have to show that it was positive. And then how did you build support for that change, even in the face of opposition?
I would suggest to you in my current position, so my first year when I first started, we were in block scheduling in the high school. And of course, my office at that time, I was in the office my first year. I learned a lot about high school. I told you at the beginning, I was a middle school teacher for 5 years and I was an elementary principal for 7. What I lacked, other than my SPED background, was high school experience. I learned a ton about high school because my office was right there in the high school. And so we transitioned from block to periods. That's not always a favorite when you traditionally have always been under block. But research would suggest there's pros and cons to both. My frustration with block was that the amount of instruction that could potentially be wasted, because let's say we did a lesson for 15 minutes, but then we spent the next hour and 15 minutes in a big transitional period. And I struggled because of the amount of rigor that was going on inside of a classroom, or the instruction, or what students were participating or engaged in. I struggled with that. And I thought, let's get to periods, because then it's a shorter amount of time. It doesn't benefit everybody. I was periods as an elementary teacher, and my art teacher, my music teacher, there was a lot of setup and a lot of cleanup. So I know it doesn't always work. Okay. But I will suggest that this past Monday night, we had our community or our CTE advisory council and our annual Title I meeting. And it was shared at that meeting that when I started, we had 8 episodes. We are currently at 61. So when you talk about benefit and how I feel like that we have been successful is that we've opened more doors and more opportunities for students to take things that have never been possible. Because we are now at a 7 period. Last year we were at 8 period. So we gave a few more minutes. Okay. So we're constantly watching that. And so it is very unique and dynamic in Carroll County, especially. And each of the special school districts have some challenges when using the vocational center, which is off-site, and when that bus runs. But what we found is that by doing periods, we were able to shorten that time, which makes students have to take it all year long versus a half a year. But that we could take those lessons and have a bigger impact and not have as much wasted time. Because every day that's wasted on instruction is going to impact us on some kind of letter grade or some kind of TCAP score. And so that would be one of the things that I would suggest to you, that by listening to a need, okay, I would also suggest that when I was a supervisor of special education, we had some concerns about elementary behaviors. I know that was within your survey. That seems to be a huge concern. That seems to be a theme. We developed what's called a Fresh Start program. I would suggest to you that research would tell you that students who are disruptive in classrooms are impacting all those other children. We developed a Fresh Start program with a certified special ed teacher and a TA. So I committed 2 FTEs. I got the district to commit 2 FTEs to this program. We limited it to 8 students. We had 4 elementary schools at the time. It could only be 8 students. It had to be some of the most challenging students. And what we found is that it was normally a kindergartner trying to transition to first grade who was just a little immature and not ready to go to first grade. They probably needed another year. The best part about that is that we had that planted in an elementary school, so that as we were working to wean that child back into general population, they had the experience of being in an elementary school, not a separate school. Okay, so they got to experience what an assembly was, what an elementary gym was, age-appropriate peers. The disadvantage is that if it was a child from one of the other elementary schools, the parent grew on that elementary school and tended to like that administrator and or that staff member and didn't want their child to go back to their home school. So that's one of the challenges on that. But I would suggest those are just a couple of experiences that I would share based on that question.
You mentioned research. How do you use research, and what sort of initiative have you used research to drive a change?
I would suggest, I'm not the biggest amount of time.
No.
Oh, I just heard it. I just had to know if I was on a timer. I was going to look at the clock, see if I messed up something. It's Friday night. I just figured you all were here all night. You've been here all week, so
We are.
I figured everybody.
Take your time.
Well, I was thinking,
All week.
I didn't think anybody would show up because everybody's going to be at basketball for a Friday night. But then I realized, Creekwood went all the way to McKenzie. So, but on behalf of my school district, we want you to be McKenzie too. Okay, so so go Creekwood, right? So I would suggest to you that a lot of the research and a lot of the information that I try to pull from, I work hard to try to read different books. Obviously, it's important. With my admin team and my executive meetings, we do what we call book studies. Last year, we did 5 different books. This year, we're on our 3rd book. I just passed out last Tuesday, The Energy Bus by John Gordon. Love The Energy Bus. Talks about energy vampires. If you've never read it, it's a quick read. We do a lot of Maxwell. We do a lot of things on leadership, okay? And leadership, running schools is like a business sometimes, and sometimes some of those concepts can cross over into education. But I would also suggest that I feel like I have a great support with TOSS, which is the Tennessee Organization for School Superintendents, which I'm a member of as a superintendent. I would also say TSBA. because obviously policy needs to be written or adapted. New policy has to be adopted. And so I utilize those outlets along with conferences. You know, again, I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. But do you know how I learned a lot of the concepts? And listen, I'm not telling you anything that I invented up here. This stuff isn't trademarked. This stuff isn't patented or copyrighted. The best educators will steal it from somebody else. You don't have to reinvent a wheel and make it round again. And so by going to conferences, by going to other school systems, I'm here just as much as you are to learn about me as to learn about your system. And I hope tonight we're able to encounter that and just learn something new from each other, and so that all of us can be better from it. But conferences are so important to me because of those networking opportunities where when you have a question or you have a concern, whether it be block versus periods, every high school in Tennessee is either block or periods. There's a couple hybrids probably out there. There's a couple what they call skinnies or minis. All right. There's all those concepts. How do you answer those questions? Go ask systems that are already doing it so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's probably how I do my best research.
These presentations that you included in your resume, were they just informative things that you put together, or is it based on gathering data and coming up with more than just a speech, but a plan?
I would suggest to you, I would not want to lie to you. I would suggest to you there were more speeches, and that was the main concept behind that. That last one that I listed was the adult ed graduation that was held up at UT Martin, and I spoke in front of all those students who were getting ready to graduate with their GED, which I want to say was near 300 plus all their parents. So I love giving presentations. Some would call me shy. I would tell you I was shy, but I'm okay speaking in front of other people too, and this camera.
Thank you.
Dr. Hebrard, excuse me. How important is data in decision making and then that application to children?
I think the data will tell a story. Okay. We've all heard that concept from TDOE. If you'll use data, it will tell a story. Sometimes you have to own the brutal facts. Sometimes it's ugly. Okay. The most recent thing that came out was what? School letter grades. All right. And I wrote down, I checked in and listen, you all may not be happy with this, but you had a lot of A's and B's. Okay. You did have one D and one F. If most people probably weren't on the commissioner's call on Wednesday when she spoke at a hearing. And she said in that hearing that those schools with a D and an F, those districts are going to have to present in front of the State Board of Education. There is a plan being worked on that if you had a D or F in your district or your school was that, you're going to have some kind of growth plan. So I feel like that data is important because in my experience with principal meetings, especially in a larger district, it becomes competitive. There's nothing wrong with being competitive. I love competitiveness. I don't always win. I hate to lose, but I don't always win. But I would suggest to you that sometimes when schools have to present their own data, whatever it is that they're presenting on, or we want a particular concept, it can be an encouragement. It can be enlightening. It might even be embarrassing sometimes if you had to present in front of your colleagues. Here's where my data is. I got 13% of my third graders reading on grade level. That's a problem with the new third grade retention law. I would suggest to you that data has to be a big part of the supervisors and the directors within the school system as they're meeting with principals, because then it has to be passed down from the principals as they're meeting with their groups, whether it be by grade level, whether it be by subject level, however they're broken up in the different schools. Every school's different because of the number of classrooms. But then I would also say that data is important when you're talking about professional development. Some of the best resources that you have with professional development are right here in your system. Your level 5 teachers are your mentors. They obviously got something going on. I'm not going to say that at some point they didn't get a good group of students that just did really well. Some teachers might even advocate, I just got a good group of guessers that particular year. But I would suggest to you that a lot of your level 5 teachers take a lot of pride in how hard they work and those long hours that they pour into understanding what can I get that student to do to get to that next level, from approaching to proficient or from below basic to approaching. Again, we just want to see some shifting. We want to see some growth among those. And in my world of special ed, I used to fight for all, because every one of those students with a disability, I didn't want you to view them because of their disability. I wanted you to find their abilities within them, because each of those kids had abilities as well. And so back to your question, I think data is very important. I think that there's so many data points out there that I think you can get lost in the weeds about what we look for. It's like putting PE teachers in with literacy numbers. Those PE teachers don't really, I'm not trying to throw PE teachers under the bus, but they're probably not as much interested in those literacy numbers or those math scores as they are on some of the concepts that they're teaching within their classroom.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Hebrard.
Hey, good job.
All right. Criteria 4, one of the reasons that you're here, and one of the reasons that we've had 3 others before you, is because that we're looking for a respected instructional leader with a strong academic background. And again, the reason you're here and the ones before us is because you have an understanding of the day-to-day operations of the classroom and then the curriculum and the educational program. So earlier we talked about student achievement, and you said that part of it was the culture that you had around it would help in our student achievement. The first question on this criterion 4 is describe your experience in developing, implementing, and evaluating an instructional program that has improved the educational achievements of students. I'd like you to give us something different this time.
Okay, let me touch on technology.
Sure.
Okay, so I feel like right now, with the availability of technology in this world and the amount of platforms, there are so many things teachers can pick from. The problem is that each of those platforms usually cost money. So one of the things as a principal I was challenged with was that we were using a program called accelerated reading. We were using it as our instruction. If you've ever used accelerating reading, you read a book, you memorize the 5 questions, you go to the computer and you try your best in trying to score 100. I'm sorry, you can't learn to read by memorizing that little book and getting your points to get to your trophy, to get your piece of candy or whatever. I would also suggest that teachers pay teachers. I got to teach before all this stuff was ever available, right? I got to teach technology, but there wasn't such thing as some of these apps, okay? We had to make our own lesson plans. We had to go to conferences and say, hey, how did you teach that aerospace? How did you teach that? How did you carve out cars? Different things like that. There are so many opportunities within technology that I think that need to be evaluated, because we're misusing them as the instructional piece instead of teaching. But don't get me wrong, humans are always going to be better than computers. Computers may be faster than us, but having an actual teacher in front of a child is always going to be my preference. And I will always fight for teachers teaching students, not computers educating our students based on a platform. With that being said, though, I'm very much pro one-to-one. Because that is where we are going. In most businesses and most things that we do, a computer is an important piece. But go to the elementary school, go on your website right now and look at how many platforms that your district probably purchases right now. And what we had to evaluate recently was how many of those platforms is one teacher using, and we're paying for a district license or a school license when we could have just paid for a teacher license. When you want to get down to the nuts and bolts in the budget, How much are you spending on technology in terms of platforms, in terms of educating kids, when you could be using that money to get an EA or a TA, educational assistant or a teaching assistant, or another certified teacher to be able to fill that classroom to educate those kids? I will always advocate that teachers are more important than those platforms that are out there. Now, I know that kids, a lot of kids, many kids are on platforms for quite a bit of their day. We're about to embark on a 3-day weekend, maybe even longer. A lot of these kids are going to be on some kind of platform, going to be on some kind of device. These kids love game-like situations. And I'm not going to say that sometimes it keeps their interest in a classroom, keeps them quiet, keeps them engaged. But is that going to be the best way to educate our children? And so I feel like that recently we've had to evaluate what we're paying for and what we're traditionally using.
And you think the traditional one-on-one is better?
I
Is that what you're saying?
I came from a one-on-one. I arrived into a none-on-none. Okay. But we are working towards one-on-one. So when you come from a top 5 school district in the state of Tennessee, who has certain advantages, and some of those things will come out in some of these questions, but one-to-one is very important. Because you know what? They have access to the whole world. They have access to their teachers without having to get their phone numbers. Whether you use Teams or Google Docs or whatever platform you want to use, those students have access to be able to engage no matter what time of day. So I'm not opposed to distance learning, even though the pandemic, I think, messed us up a little bit because we've gotten lazy on that part. And some people who didn't value education have gotten further to not value education in our school building. I don't know that distance learning is the best for all students, but I'm not going to say that it couldn't be good for some students, okay, if done correctly. But I believe one-to-one is an opportunity for students to be able to engage with this world. If you think about it, that computer has probably helped with handwriting that teachers can read, even though we're not working on penmanship anymore. Some students don't even know how to sign their name because we don't work on penmanship or cursive. So there are some downfalls by doing one-to-one, okay? But I think that teachers are able to read that. But I would also say that we're able to transition and save that document, send it to the teacher, utilize those devices in an effective manner.
It kind of rolls into question 2 there as well, if you want to continue on that, the steps you take to ensure academic excellence in all of our schools. I think you covered a lot of that, but if you add something to it.
I will. It's called a strategic plan. And that's something that I had to write with my district. And unless you've written a strategic plan, you don't sometimes know what goes into it. My strategic plan has 5 things. It's called, number 1, academic excellence. Number 2, educator excellence. Number 3, learning environment excellence. Number 4, operational excellence. And number 5, stakeholder excellence. Within those things, as an academic side, you talk about scholarship. With educator excellence, you talk about mentorship. How are you retaining your best teachers? How are you mentoring your new teachers? With learning environment, you talk about leadership. If your schools don't have the best leaders running those schools, then we need to find somebody who can run that school effectively. It's often said that if you have the best principals in those buildings, then 80% of my job will already be accomplished because they're going to be able to resolve that from the school side. Under operational excellence, it would be fiscal stewardship. Our budget should be very transparent. Most budgets are online and they break it down by school and what percentage, but this staff should be owed the opportunity to be able to see what part of the budget goes to what school, that school, this program, that program. And there should be nothing hidden because with your board, you have to present at some point, or the director of schools has to present to a county commission. I used to work in a county system for 12 years. One of the things that frustrates county commissioners more is when you try to hide something in a budget. And so I think that you have to have fiscal stewardship and be open to the different things that you are spending money on. And I think that's important. And then the last one under stakeholder excellence, I think that the partnership How are we going to grow our programs and grow our schools if we don't get partners in terms of industries to come in and help, whether it be CTE, whether it be college and career readiness, whether it be, something science related or math related or history related. There's a thing called partnership. And again, if you don't ask, you won't get. But you have a plethora of opportunities within this community and within this county that would love to be in schools. And I'm not saying that they're not already, because I'm not in your school, so I don't know. But I would also suggest that you haven't tapped into every one of those resources. But I would suggest to you a strategic plan. Those are my 5 right there.
Well, we've got. I want to ask you this. When we take a student from kindergarten and we take them all the way out through the 12th grade and they graduate, what are the 3 things that you want those students to have when they leave our school system?
Well, what they need in front of them first are these. They need the best principals running their schools. They need the right teachers in the driver's seat, including academic coaches. I would also suggest that how to leverage to be able to give those children the 3 things that, give me a moment, I'm going to think of those 3 things, is how to utilize your days for professional development. How do you strategically place your experienced teachers and your experienced staff into those opportunities to help our young teachers or our struggling teachers to give the students what they need so that they can walk out of here as a graduate of whether it be Creekwood High School or Dickson County High School, who then become a tax-paying citizen. We used to use that term in the SPED world because you know what it meant if you were a tax-paying citizen? It meant you were employed. We've got to make these kids employable with those skills that when we talk about, you not only show up, but then you also work hard. And that's where we're struggling in the business side right now. We can't even get people to show up to work because the only job a kid has in school is to come to school. How many of those concepts do we teach in school? We ask you to show up. That's your attendance. That's how you keep a job. We ask you to be responsible for the tasks that need to be completed. What does a job ask you to do? We ask you to problem solve in a school so that when you're struggling with a friend or a non-friend, you're able to work that out and maybe not have to bump fist all the time. So there are concepts within just asking them to come to school. So from kindergarten to 12th grade, several things that I can think of off the top of my head are this, is that how are we preparing them when they walk across the stage that they can take on this world, no matter what degree they seek, no matter what industry they decide to go into, no matter where they decide to live, how are they going to be able to be successful on taking on this world? Are they fluent in financial literacy so that they can even write a check and pay their bills? Do they know what credit card debt is? Or is it just easy enough just to put it on plastic and hope someday somebody's going to pay for it? Because we all know that that isn't always the case, because people will come looking for you. When you don't pay your car payment, they're going to come looking for that car. But how do we produce that person that can take on this world no matter what the challenges is? How can we produce a productive, tax-paying citizen? Because I think that is very important, because that means we made you employable. No matter if you're serving burgers or you're the CEO of a company. In education, I love it because you know what? I look at kids every day and say, there's future teachers right here. I tease with some of the kids because you know what? I try to encourage them one day they're going to have my job. And that's probably true at some point. If they go through the education and work through the steps and that with those doors that open up for them, they may one day become a director of schools or a teacher or a principal or a CEO of a company. And the third thing that I would love to see, I would love for them to be able to live in a world that works together. You know what? It's not always peace and harmony in this world, is it? But I would love for our schools, because of engagement, that we have taught them how to problem solve enough that they could go out and work alongside somebody they never thought. Because a lot of times when they get to go to work, do we get to pick our teammates? You're going to hire a new director of schools. Do they get to pick all their teammates? Sometime, and maybe at some point, but I would also say they're going to start with what they have, aren't they? Because they don't know how good they may have it until they get to know each of those people. So it's not a rush to, oh, hey, I can't work here because of X person. Okay. Again, different leaders will inspire and motivate people differently because of how they either build that relationship with them, how they talk to them, how they make time for them, or what doors they open. Did I answer your question, sir?
I've got 3 down.
Okay.
Would you like me to read them back to you?
No, sir.
You sure?
I can only say it one time.
Okay. If I got it written down, I'm going to hold you to these 3. Number 4, what do you consider to be your major accomplishment as a school instructional leader?
You know, I think in my 21 years, I mean, there's lots of accomplishments that I could share, but there's also lots of things that I've yet to complete. Because in the end, I said one of my guiding principles was to continue to get better. Even when you think you're as good as you are, you still can be better. And so a couple of things that I would suggest to you that I feel like are accomplishments is graduation rates. Listen, I would love to have 100% graduation rates, but you know what? Those are hard sometimes because there are students who do drop out, and that's unfortunate. And I hope and I wish for them to be able to go get their GED or to become successful doing something other than sitting on a couch. Where that comes from is that I used to work with students with some of the hardest disabilities and and had some of the biggest challenges. And I would always tell them, don't you ever think you're just going to sit on a couch and collect a check? Because that isn't, we will find a role for you. Okay. So finding those students, when I talk about all, I had 0 vans to transport students with special needs to work-based learning or community-based learning opportunities. By the time I left Oak Ridge, I left them with 4. That's huge. We had no way to transport kids other than renting a bus. I used grant money, and I asked another program if they were not going to use their van, can I use their van? Because here's what I'm going to do with that van. We put kids out in the community shopping, working with staff and without staff who became employable. That's a huge accomplishment that I feel like I was a part of. I don't take all the credit for that. I also came into a district where at some point I'll share with you the 7 keys to college and career readiness. But one of the things that I shared when I interviewed for my previous position is that all students would have a 27 or higher if they wanted to go to college. I got laughed at when I mentioned that as one of my keys. And to date, I have 8 names on a plaque that I've had made, so that's sitting in the front foyer of this school, so that people can remember we can get 27s and higher. And we have 22 students who have a 21 or higher. I was told when I made that comment that, we're a 16 or 17 school. If you don't lay out the expectation and give them something to shoot for, they will never go for it. If you want to be satisfied or comfortable with this number, they will maintain that number. But if you want to see excellence, you've got to go to here. The third one that I would share with you is my Extreme Makeover program. Again, I was young, I was green. I based it. I didn't make up Extreme Makeover. There was a show. ABC may come after me after hearing this on YouTube. I don't know. They had Extreme Makeover Home Edition. Do you remember that show? I called mine Extreme Makeover Middle School Edition. And guess what we did? Every break, spring break, fall break, Thanksgiving break, I took a group of students and went and did some kind of mission work within the United States, usually locally. But we were blessed to have an opportunity to go after Hurricane Katrina hit in Mississippi. I took a group down there and everything was paid for. You talk about community support. That was a program that was just launching. And like I said, had I not been talked into getting into leadership, I would still be enjoying that today.
Thank you for that. What three most important things in your life?
The three most important things in my life: God, family, country.
You were talking about one-on-one, best to have a teacher, but there are programs, computer programs. Do you use Ingenuity in your system?
Yes,
Right.
we have access to it. Yes.
Just how do you use it?
I would suggest Carroll County is unique that they take that down at the vocational school. Like for students who are in the alternative program, I don't have the alternative school in my actual school. So Edgenuity is sometimes used for those students in the alternative program so that they can continue to be educated. But I was tasked with, in my previous experience, with going to a highly effective district near Knoxville that was getting 100% graduation rate. Because you know what? In Oak Ridge, it wasn't enough to be at 92 or 93% or 95. They wanted 100% because it looks good on a report card. It looks good to the community when you can say you have 100% graduation rate, but it's very tough. But this school district in East Tennessee was claiming that no matter when you showed up, they would have 100% graduation. So I went to that school system. I met with their officials and said, "How are you doing it?" It was Edgenuity. So I don't have any experience with Edgenuity personally. I've never opened the platform. I'm not going to act like I even know what it looks like. Okay. I have heard that word and I know that we utilize it, but I know that a district was able to use it to be able to help those students who were struggling to meet graduation requirements and get them so that helped their graduation rate. I'm not suggesting we use that. I use a different method for some of those.
Will you say your last name for me?
Hebrard.
Hebrard. Thank you for applying, and thank you for coming and interviewing with us. Criteria number 5 is the ability to unify diverse groups and build and maintain high morale among employees. So how can you bring together diverse, talented groups of individuals to form an effective team?
So I've spoken a little bit on this, but I'll expand upon it. So a superintendent's advisory council, I think, is important for that each school has representation. Because the school up in Charlotte or Dickson or several of these other communities may have different needs. And how are you going to know what those needs are if you never ask to be able to help them to complete their objectives, to be able to help our students to be the best students that they possibly can be? So that would be one area. The second thing that I would say, based in even on my experience and even to this day, I meet Tuesday afternoon at 1:00 every week, unless it's a holiday, with my executive team. My executive team is this: my SPED director, my CTE director, and my 2 principals and myself. That's my executive team. It's a small inner circle because those people have communicated and worked with all the different schools, the principals, the staff. They know some of the needs. We can talk about what that vision is. We can drive that vision, that mission statement. And that's important to be able to make time in your calendar each week at a set time, because those conversations are important. I would also suggest to you, because my principals are on my executive team now, I don't have to do this just because I'm smaller than what I was before. In my previous district, the superintendent, we had monthly admin meetings. When I talk about admin, that was all the different departments and every principal. That's where the data gets shown about different schools. That's where new concepts that potentially were passed by a board of education get discussed. Here's what that rollout looks like. so that it can be communicated from the top so that everybody understands the direction and who's communicating that direction. So I think that when you talk about diverse groups, those are just some of the inner workings inside of a school. Outside of a school, I think that it's very important that you're actively engaged in church and civic organizations so that you can capture those groups' attention and or take advantage of what they want to give schools. When I started a homework diner, again, I didn't invent this wheel. I seen it on NBC News one night, New York City. Some school was doing this homework diner, and all it was an evening each week. They opened up their school. They had professional staff, and they had a church who provided a meal. Do you know what I stole? Called homework night. And I put it on the Thursday of our PTO nights. Because not only did I provide an opportunity where parents were going to come to a PTO meeting at an elementary school, I also provided games and activities and how to read to your child, simple things that you could do at home. But I got the local church to provide a meal, whether it was spaghetti, chicken tenders, hamburgers. People will come for food. I'll come for food. I think that it's important, though, that you meet them where they're at, but you also don't exclude the community. And I know in your survey, it talked about listening to parents. What better way to listen to parents? I'm not going to say they're always right. I'm a parent too. I'm not always right. But if you can open those doors and offer those opportunities for them to be heard, and that sometimes they feel valued, that, you know what, I listened to them. Because you know what? Maybe some of the things that they're talking about aren't so bad. Maybe if it didn't work in this school, what could it look like in this school?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you please describe a situation related to your current job that demonstrates your ability to inspire and motivate people?
We are all about champions for children. That is my vision. That is the vision of my school district that I brought. And everything we talk about is being a champion for children. If I write you a note card, I'm going to thank you for being a champion for children. That message has to keep going across. Okay. But there are certain criteria to being a champion for children. And my staff know this, and this is how I motivate them. And then we just use the same line, our vision, champions for children. To be a champion for children, you must be present. You must be engaged. You need to be kind. You need to be professional, and you need to be better. Those are 5 simple things that we do when we talk about being a champion for children. And so that's all I've strived for in the last 2.5 years, is to hit those 5 criteria to be a champion for children. What does it mean to be present? What does it mean to be engaged? I will suggest to you that there's a difference between engagement and involvement. I can involve you in something, but it doesn't mean you're engaged. When you're engaged, it means you were prepared. You came to work. You got your hands dirty. You rolled up your sleeves and said, how can I be a part of this team? Kindness comes from the heart. When somebody says, please, thank you, I'm sorry, kindness costs nothing. And so that to be a champion for children, you must be able to make children feel welcome and their family each and every day. Why do I stand at the front? Why do I love that part of my accessibility and visibility? Is because it costs me nothing to be able to say good morning to that kid. What's even better is those kids who are so shy, who never will say good morning. They always were looking down because, I was the new guy. Now, because if I'm talking to somebody, they have to make a point, stop, and they'll say good morning before I get the good morning out. You can train students to what you want and what you expect if it's constant and repetitive. But kindness comes from the heart. Being professional, that's everything. How do you show up? That's first impressions. That's day-to-day dress. That's day-to-day how you treat people. The places you go in the evenings, who you associate with. Do you want to know what gets leaders in trouble? 2 things. Only 2 things will get leaders in trouble. You know what will get them out of a leadership position? Finance and romance. Mess with either one of those, you're in trouble. Okay? So what are you doing? What are you doing in your professional life that's going to have people take notches out of it? and be better, that was just one of my guiding principles. And that's how some of that was formulated, is you just put some of those together. Because again, I'm not the best at anything. Do I dabble in a lot of things? Absolutely. Am I good at some things? Absolutely. But I also know that tomorrow's a new day. If I'm still talking about yesterday, then I haven't done much today. And so that I have to seek to try to be better each day. And that's how I motivate my staff. And I applaud them for those who have taken on that task. Because again, this world is very challenging. Do you think everybody wants to even be better? There are some people who are comfortable. Why be comfortable when you can be better?
This might build on that just a little bit, but just cite us an example of what you've done to build, maintain high morale among your staff.
I would suggest several things that I've brought to this particular experience. I partnered with my insurance agent. We do what's called Teacher of the Month. So we recognize a different teacher. They bring a small plaque and a gift card to that teacher. And again, didn't have that before. I also do what's called a Staff Member of the Month. And that's anybody who's not certified. My cafeteria, my custodial staff, my TAs. Do you know what a smile means when you've just made somebody's day? And what's fun is that we have what I had made was a little parking thing, because my intent was to allow them to park anywhere on campus. It's like churches sometimes. In some churches, you can't sit in certain pews because that family or that person always sits in that pew, and you're going to upset somebody. In parking lots in certain places, people have parking spaces that they get used to and accustomed to. And so I made this little parking thing because it was going to become a joke that you're going to get to park, and I'm going to plant that sign anywhere that you want. And just know you might make somebody mad. But we've never put it on a poll because most people just wanted to take a picture. And then, of course, we throw it out on Facebook because that's the only platform we use in terms of sharing the good news, about our school system. I would also suggest to you that a couple of things. Right before Christmas, I do a breakfast. I actually named it my kids. Caleb and Keenan are my two kids. There's no secret about that. They're my world travelers with me. All right. But we had Caleb and Keenan's Christmas breakfast. We invite every staff member. I make sure that every staff member has breakfast, and it's a good old country cooking breakfast using our culinary lab. I would also suggest at Teacher Appreciation Week, a cookout is had. Ribs, chicken, some kind of steak. Staff love that kind of stuff. Do you know what it's like when you don't have to bring lunch one day to school as a teacher? That's a bonus. That is a bonus. So those are just a couple of things. I would also suggest to you that one of my challenges that has always been a challenge to me is taking time to write notes. But I have intentionally tried to take time to write notes of thanks and notes of appreciation, that when staff do something out of the ordinary, or when staff take the time to make a difference in a kid's life, when I see them being champions for children, I'll write them a quick note. What's interesting is that, I didn't write notes because I often thought of it like birthday cards. People would give you a birthday card. What happens? Or a Christmas card. It usually goes in the trash after some point. What's fun is that I had logos, my school crest, on the one side of the card, and a lot of those cards are hanging up in those teachers on their little boards outside or next to their desk. They appreciate those little things. But then I also have an awesome administrative assistant who keeps me up to date on everybody's birthday, including board members. Do you know what's fun is when everybody gets a birthday card on their birthday and they wonder how you do it? Again, I'm not the best. I just have the best with me.
We would all love to know Steve Haley's birthday.
In October.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Any follow-up questions? We're going to take a 5 to 10 minute break.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to start back up. We're on criteria number 6. Seeks information and ideas relative to the problem, makes decisions that demonstrate fairness, impartial judgment, appropriate analysis, and sensitivity for those affected by the decisions is the category. First question. Think of a problem brought to you recently. What was the problem and how did you handle it?
One I'm going to talk about with you all. There's obviously each day is a challenge. Again, if you go digging in the dirt and that's all you look for, that's what you'll get. And so those opportunities sometimes turn into challenges or problems that you must address. And if you don't address them, they only get bigger and they only become more problematic. And so last year when I sat in as the interim principal, I talked a little bit earlier about that one of our problems was vaping. And I'm sure your community, like my community, like many communities across this nation, struggle with students who choose to vape or use tobacco. There is a law that says that you must be 21 to be able to partake in those types of things. There are some parents who don't value education. We know that. That's a truancy problem. That's a whole different issue. But we also have parents who allow students to vape or smoke or dip. We don't issue those things at school. Those things aren't provided in some kind of vending machine. But if you will not tackle the problem, you're never going to resolve the issue. So when I said last year we had 60 plus vaping issues, there are consequences. Our policy, our code of conduct would read something like this. Your first offense is 5 days in the alternative school. Your second offense is 10 days in the alternative school. Your third is 20. Your fourth is 45, and so on. I never even thought that we would ever have anything more than a third. But you know what? You get that one that just wants to test the limits. This year, as I shared with you, we've had 4. I feel like that we've taken out some of the big hitters. When we talk about impacts on your culture of your school, in high school especially, not that vaping is not going on in other schools with other kids because they're learning from each other or their parents, that in high schools that sometimes you get people who are not on a graduation pathway who honestly distract from those who want to graduate and go on and do something great with their lives. And so part of the problem is vapes. And how we have resolved that is that, one, there is a consequence. If that was my kid, he would have a consequence. If that was your kid, they would have a consequence. The same consequence based on the code of conduct or the policy that is set out. There are parents who feel like, oh, my kid, that's the first time they've ever been in trouble. Can you just overlook that? If you start overlooking for one, you're going to have to dig yourself out of a hole, because what you do for one is what you should do for all. And so we have been very consistent with our discipline. The other thing that I would suggest to you is that we involve our SRO. The only thing my SRO does is issues a citation. Under the law, he is allowed to issue a citation for a tobacco violation, who then has to go before a judge. And that consequence, whatever the judge decides to do, the juvenile judge decides to do, which is normally maybe a small fine. Again, we're trying to deter them from doing this behavior in our schools. Now, what you do outside of school, I don't always get to influence that. I can try to motivate you not to do some of these things to your body or yourselves outside of the school hours, but I get you roughly from 7:30 till 3:15. I try everything I can to try to have an impact on you during that period of time. And if you're in after school activities, obviously those things count, sports, clubs, all those things, if you're in my building. But I think that adding the SRO piece is a huge benefit because it adds another level of citation. Now, it's not going to go on some master criminal record because they're a juvenile. But I would suggest to you that when they have to pay debts or they have to go before a judge, that you hope that some of that behavior will become deterred so that they will go the other way. I would also suggest that the vapes allowed us to open a door that, again, if you are not going to do something beneficial in the school, graduate, and you're taking up space, let's find an alternative way to get you graduated, to get you to be able to move to the next step of your life, which for most of them, that's the working world, or TCAT. TCAT's a viable option now. So is the military. They will take GEDs. And so I think that if you can find those who are disrupting your school the most and offer options, you plant seeds early, you offer options to the family that suggest this. Yes, your child is afforded an opportunity to graduate, but he or she is going to fall short. And when they're 16, 17, or 18, and they're short many, many credits, that obstacle becomes bigger, because we know that the law says that at 18, they're an adult. They can walk out of this school and there's not a whole lot we can do, and they become a dropout. Before they become a dropout, I would suggest to you we need to offer options like high set, adult ed, an alternative school program where you put them online to be able to graduate, so that you take them out of the environment where they're being the most disruptive. And so that's probably one of the biggest problems that I feel like we have tackled. Now, do I wish that I had 4 this year? I'll count it as a win. I hope I don't show up next week and have 4 new ones. Okay. But I think that the students now understand, because we have taken such a hard stance and we've treated everybody the same, no matter who mom, dad, grandma, or grandpa is. We've taken the same stance and been consistent. And if you'll be consistent, you can get to a solution of a problem.
Tell us about the most important decision you've made in your last or current position. How did you involve the people who would be affected by that decision?
Start with what I started with on the guiding principle. The most important decision is showing up. If you don't show up, then it means you didn't get up out of bed. But you can't get the work completed if you don't show up. And so that is a very important decision each and every day that each of us has to make. I'm no different from any of you. I put one leg through my pants at a time, just like you. I put one sock on a time. I put one shoe on a time. A lot of the same things that you do. You may put your left foot in, I may put my right foot in, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't make me any better or any worse. But showing up is so important, because if you're going to make a difference in a kid's life, you have to be in front of them. I can't be the best person. I cannot be a champion for children. I cannot be the best leader if all I did was sit behind a computer screen. I have 2 things that I walked into my office with. I know a lot of people have offices and they do a lot of things with family. I have my planner and I have my American flag that was provided to me from Iraq as a principle that was given to me from a military family for what we were doing for children in my community. The American flag stands proud in my office, in my area, because it flew over a country that we had to help and assist with. And so I would say that if you don't show up, you can't make a difference in these kids' lives. I would also suggest some other things called second breakfast. I'm fortunate enough to be a CEP school, which means that my students eat at no charge, breakfast and lunch. But a kid can't learn if they're hungry. And so one of the things that we developed last year was called second breakfast. Because, sometimes when you get up and you get to school at 7:30 or 7:40, your belly just isn't ready to eat. For some of my kids, they probably just rolled out of bed and rolled right into the building just in time of that tardy bell. Some get in there tardy and breakfast isn't available. But after that second period, you know what happens sometimes to people? They get hungry again. And so we offered what's called a second breakfast for those students to be able to go down That involved my cafeteria staff. That involved my leadership team to be able to make that step so that we can provide an opportunity for our students to be able to excel in classrooms.
Thank you.
All right, under criteria 7, searching for a director that has the ability to work with the county commission to develop and administer a comprehensive school budget, including the allocation of resources and someone who understands federal, state, and local funding issues. Explain how you would develop a school system budget, and tell us how you would involve, who you would involve and how you would involve them.
There's a lot of people involved in a school budget. Although I'm at a $6.5 million budget and you're over an $85 million budget, a lot of that is eaten up in salaries and benefits. Those things are all guided by HR, by your approval of a budget, and a salary schedule and those types of things. In my experience, I have involved multiple people, and I've also had experience in being involved with multiple people, similar to what you all are currently doing, or your current interim director, Dr. McCord, is doing, hosting principal and or department individual meetings is so important. But before you get to that, in November, what I have done now and what I had done to me before when I was a SPED supervisor was in November, you were handed a worksheet, a simple one-pager that had things like this. What staff additions or deletions do we need to consider for your school or your department? Second, what capital projects do we need to consider for your department or your school? Some departments don't put that down. I didn't ever have any capital projects. Those are big time ticket items. The next was furniture. What furniture needs do you need for your school or your department? And the fourth was what supplies or materials do you need? What that offered and what I currently offer to my admin and my departments by passing that in November and asking for it roughly the third week of January is I'm going to give you about two full months to get with your staff, to get with your teams at the school level or within your department and talk about what are our needs. I know Christmas break falls in there. I know some snow days may fall in there, but 2 months is a lot of time for you to be able to brainstorm what are our needs. The thing of it is, as a director, I may think like X school needs another math teacher, but the numbers of students may not dictate that another math teacher needs to go there. Maybe we need an ELA teacher, or maybe this other school needs something. And so what it does is allow the ownership of that principal or supervisor to be able to share what he or she feels like is needed for that particular area to be successful. And then in January, I will review those, sit down with my executive team and just review those and just kind of brainstorm. It's kind of like right now, I've also put out my letters of intent. It all coincides. That's due here the first week of February, because before we get into budget talks and real budget discussions, I need to know what I got potentially in play. Do I have somebody retiring? Do I have somebody going on a leave of absence for some reason? Do I have somebody resigning? Do I have somebody who's seeking to move into a different position or to a different school? All those things are available on a letter of intent. And so all that coincides, because then when we sit down with executive, we talk about, okay, here's where we're at. We don't know what amount of money at that point we even have in January or February. Right now, we're just going off the basis that we hope to get what we have already and try to stay within that budget, knowing that we may have to crunch some numbers somewhere, and where can we begin to make some changes. Sometimes it's in equipment. Sometimes if you don't have a capital project going on or money going towards that, then you can move that money over into a different line item. Or professional development. Maybe we need more of that money. If we're not using all that money, where can we put some of that money? Travel, that's another line item. Sometimes you get new teachers coming in. They cost differently than what a more experienced teacher with 30 years costs. So there's all those platforms that you look at. And then I would suggest to you that you sit down individually. Your executive team sits down with each school. And this is what happened previously, is that I had to present my SPED budget to 3 members of the executive team. And I just went in and shared what I thought I needed or didn't need. Again, if you don't ask, you won't get. So I'm not going to suggest to you that some administrators aren't going to oversell themselves in trying to get more than probably what they need. And I would encourage them to do that, because again, if you don't ask, you won't get. And so that process goes along into probably March. And then I would suggest to you that as a board, my experience is that there is a presentation of the line items in the budget, so that at least there is an opening read. I won't even call it first read. Okay. Are you a 1 read or a 2 read district for policy? Are you two read? Okay. So normally you would present that and just open it up. Then you would go through the next meeting that you would hold. You would offer an opportunity for the public to see that budget and or to respond to the budgetary needs or departments. You just kind of open it up. Again, offering opportunities for people to comment. I'm not saying that things would change, but they could be considered. But then I would also suggest then I only have to present as a special school district. I only have to present to my board. I serve as the mayor when I sign off on E-plan. So I'm in a unique situation. My previous districts, one had to present to a city council and then my first experience, you had to present to a county commission. And when I said earlier that county commissioners, I've been to some of those meetings in my first experience as an administrator, because my superintendent asked for us to show up to show support when he presented the budget. County commissioners don't like when you're trying to hide something. And when they have questions of why, and it's easier to read if you'll break it down by school. And if you have $500,000 in salaries at one elementary school and only $200,000 at another, why is that? Because you should be able to explain that process. It may be due to the number of children. I'm not saying that you can't have that big difference, but I think you should be able to explain why you have certain positions and why you're asking for certain positions to a county commission. In my experience, we try to have our budget approved before July 1. All of my experiences, because as a principal, what was most frustrating is that county commission delayed the passing of the budget, and it was in August, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to fill that teacher position. So I would work hard to be able to get you those numbers as quickly as possible to the board so that you all could review that and say it's a go to present that to county commission. Because again, that is one of your duties, is to approve that budget. And I think that that's important for you to see and or to hear the needs. And how I have done it in my these last 2 years is I'll create a presentation. It'll be up on screen, and I'll sell it to you very quickly. Here are the things that I'm adding, and here's the things I'm deleting. You're not going to have to search for those things. The numbers are the numbers. Okay. The salary schedule, if a BS 0 is at 47,000, you shouldn't have to worry that this BS 0 got 47 and this one got 42. If the salary schedule says they get 47, every BS 0 gets 47.
All right, thank you. What steps would you take to ensure that school funds are spent wisely and accounted for properly in compliance with state and federal mandates?
I would suggest to you that every district has to have an annual audit. And from that audit, booklets are provided to the Board of Education. In my current role, they do what's called an internal audit, which is your schools. And then they do an overall audit. And my board has enjoyed, because we invite a person from that firm to come and present the findings of those audits. So number one, we make those things public, because if there's something we need to correct, there should be nothing to hide. If they're major findings, those have to be fixed immediately. But a lot of times there's just minor findings, just like any evaluation process. There's always something somebody's going to catch. But I would also suggest that a way that we got better based on an audit recommendation was that I, as the director of schools, signed off on monthly bills to show that I had knowledge of how much I'm spending for water or electricity or gasoline or paying for certain credit cards, but that I had knowledge. And so we actually, as a principal, so one of the things we rolled out is that my principals, based on the bookkeeper at the school levels, the principal has to sign off on those monthly reports. And I, as the director of schools, have to sign off on the district monthly reports. So there are some checks and balances, because if I get a water bill that says $6,000, I'm going to probably ask a question, because $6,000 is a lot of water that obviously went through. And I'm not saying that watering a football field don't cost money. There may be times of years that it may be higher, but in December, I shouldn't have a $6,000 water bill. We flush toilets and we wash hands, but we don't flush them that many times. So I think that there are checks and balances by having your administrators to just peek at them and just see if there's some kind of abnormality.
Thank you. Our board is dependent on the county commission to fund the budget. So different than what you're accustomed to now.
Correct.
How would you propose to gain their support? And adding to that, what would be your strategy to gain their support in the funding of a budget and or capital projects?
The worst thing that I think a director of schools could do is only show up to the meeting when they're asking for money. And that's any director of schools for any city council or county commission. I think to build a relationship, you need to be at every one of those meetings to represent your school system. I think it's important that county commissioners see you as the director of schools or other officials from the school in those county commission meetings, because you know what? They're taking on important business just like you all take on important business. And I think it's important that if they had a question based on the schools, whether it became public or they had a sidebar with you, that they were able to ask that. But they can't ask that if you're not present. I know, yes, they may have your number or they can send you an email, but sending a text and sending an email is not the same as you seeing it in person. Seeing how they can communicate a need, communicate back to you an answer to the question, their mannerisms, their eye communication, all those different things. Because again, you can quickly find out if somebody's hiding something, or somebody generally has something that they're trying to plant a seed for. So I think that it's important that the director of schools is at all those county commission meetings so that they can forge that relationship. I would also suggest that it's important with that open door policy that you offer the opportunity not only for board members to be able to seek a time to come and speak with you, but then also county commissioners can come and have that opportunity. Whether it be in an office, listen, I'm not very good in an office, okay? I know that sometimes you got to have private conversations. I live in a glass house, I feel like. My whole life is very public, being in this role that I'm in right now. And so having conversations in hallways, I don't have any concern, because unless it needs to be behind closed doors, I can always be on camera. And I can always make sure that, you know what, somebody isn't going to misconstrue why we were meeting. As a principal, yes, I had an office, and my office had one window in the door. And boy, did they know when that door shut. People seemed to walk by that office just to peek in to see who was in that office, okay? And so just because I had the door shut didn't mean that it was always a hard conversation. There are hard conversations to have. Hard conversations aren't fun, but sometimes they have to happen. But I would also suggest that besides an office, the point I was making is that sometimes you meet them where they're at, maybe where they work, maybe you have lunch. Maybe you offer an opportunity for a coffee and donut. Hey, meet me down here at one of your local places, and I'll offer an opportunity. Hey, I'm going to be here from 7 to 8 o'clock or 6 to 7 a.m. Come down before you go to work. Let's talk. I think you have to extend that arm and that branch out. It's very important.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up on Mr. Vandervoort's questions. You're talking about your budget and your audit. You're a special school district.
Sir.
And I understand the aspect of you work is the role of the mayor in that budget process. When it comes to audit, since you're operate that direction, do y'all have a accounting firm that does your audit, or is a comptroller do your audit?
We have an external out of Nashville. They usually send somebody from Jackson, but it's out of Thompson and Thompson out of
I
Nashville.
knew they did some, I call them private audits. You know, it's not the comptroller, but they contract it out.
Correct.
So that's what we do with our schools. We contract that out for the activity fund, and then our overall budget is done to the comptroller. So I wanted to verify that difference.
It's not cheap. I will say that.
No.
For the level of service, I'll be honest, I'm disappointed because I feel like I'm behind right now because we have not even gotten our results. Not that I'm expecting anything that's going to red flag. In my district, it's because we're small.
It's probably similar to
I usually do the bank. I usually run the bank money down each day just so that my finance person doesn't have it. That's how small we are. But that allows me to get out of the building for a few minutes, plus go make contact with the bank who supports my school. But I would suggest I'm disappointed in the level of service sometimes because even when they present to my board, normally it's the low man on the totem pole.
Mm-hmm.
They send the new guy who didn't evaluate my school and can't answer. The first year, they could not answer the questions that the board had on numbers. And sometimes if you have a question on a certain number or a certain finding, you'd like to hear the truth and not skirting around. Well, let me find out that information.
Right.
I'm not an auditor. I'm not an investigator, so I can't speak to those things. I will have had a conversation to try to understand, hey, what are you about to present so that we can be prepared to make a change or a adjustment or whatever that may be. But I will say this last year, I felt like because I had said, don't send me the new person, they did a better job, but it's still, sometimes it's like, sometimes there's young people involved in that and they're not as well versed as some of those who have done audits for 20, 30 years.
Any other follow-ups?
When you say you would meet with these commissioners or whoever, and try to build this relationship that they can know kind of what you're trying to propose in your budget. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying there for point number 3?
No, I would suggest to you that
You'd go have coffee with
I
them
would try to meet with them even outside of budget time.
Right.
Because I think it's very important that you build that relationship and have an established relationship with somebody, not just when you're coming and asking for money.
Right. So let me ask you this. This is what I wanted to get to. So how do you handle it when someone you're just meeting outside the budget and they know that you're wanting something's going to be there down the line, and they're making deals or trying to make deals with you? How are you going to handle that?
Well, listen, finance and romance will get any leader pushed out of a building. Okay.
Yep.
And so there should be no deals. Number one. Okay. We shouldn't.
There should be, or are you saying that there should?
There should not be deals being cut so that one school benefits over another school, or that some family member. And again, I deal with all this kind of stuff. Okay. I will hire the best people for the positions that come open. That there will be no doubt about that. I already do that right now. I have to make tough calls. Do some people wish that their family member or this person or that person get a certain role? Just because you're the mayor, just because you're a county commissioner, just because you're a board member, just because you're a principal, just because you're a preacher, just because you're the sheriff. Listen, I'm going to treat everybody fairly. And if somebody wants to come and interview for a position, I'll give you a shot to interview, but I'm also going to put the most qualified person in that position. So if those are the kinds of deals you think about, okay, it's not going to be one of these. There will never be a deal where here's $20,000 if you'll do this. There will never be a time that you'll see me take money that is not mine. My contract says that I cannot have another job or accept money. When I tell you that I volunteer and do the clock, basketball clock operators make $25 a night. My $25 goes back to the basketball program because I don't ever take a dime of that because I can't, but I also wouldn't because that's not my money. I want my program to benefit from that. So if those are the deals you're speaking of, I can speak to that.
There's all kinds of things that I'm sure that come up, because we deal with politics and politicians and I just wanted to know how you'd handle it. If you say that you should not take it, that's great. I would rather hear you will not take it or will not make those deals. But I appreciate your candidness.
Ready for number 8? Criteria number 8 from the survey is the respondents wanted a director who fosters support, confidence, and pride within the community for the school system through timely information sharing and providing meaningful opportunities to be involved. How would you make certain the public knows and supports what's happening in our schools?
Right now, my answer for what we do right now is push out a lot on social media through my school site. It's important. And in my previous role, we actually, each department and each school had their own social media. We had a Twitter and a Facebook. And it was important that there were expectations of what was posted or not posted. Nothing political could ever be posted. We don't support one candidate over another candidate on school-related social medias. All right. We promote students. We promote staff who are excelling and making a difference and doing great things in our schools and in our community. That's what gets posted. I would also suggest in my role right now that at most board meetings, I'm not going to suggest it's all because sometimes it's very hard to get people to come. We work hard to intentionally try to recognize a student or a group of students. There is no better thing to a parent than have your child to be introduced in front of a group of professionals and be able to share whatever they have accomplished. Same with sporting events or other school-sponsored events. Teachers and students love to be recognized. And so I think that you have to take advantage of those opportunities to be able to share the good news because, again, you have to drive your message. If you're not sharing the good news, then how are people going to ever know, I want my child to go to that school? And so social media is one aspect. It is not the only aspect. We know that people use social media for their day-to-day lives. We know people use it to harm other people's feelings or to insult people or to attack people. But in my school districts and all the expectations we laid out for a social media, expectation was that here are those expectations that you will follow if you have a platform, whether it be school or department related.
Thank you. Next, cite an instance in your current position that demonstrates your ability to build confidence in the schools.
I think, showing up, but also being available every morning, standing in the front. You talk about building confidence. Do you know how many teachers and students and parents appreciate the fact that an administrator, let alone the director of schools, is standing at the front door, trying to take care of kids, making everybody feel welcome? That's important in my community. And it has been since I was a principal when I stood out front and welcomed every kid. People, I feel, are confident that I'm going to try to protect them to the best of my ability, but also that I'm there because I want to be there because of the students, because I can't drive the culture that I want in that building if I'm not present. The other thing I would suggest to you is that based on the new law is one of the things that I do, because right now I have one SRO. I will get a second one at some point. It's just there's a shortage in my area. Is that I check doors. So in the morning, that's my daily walk. You know, there's a whole study on taking 5 minutes and doing a little walk. It's called an appreciation walk. Go and share appreciation with staff members that you see. Go say hi to kids. And so I stand on the high school side, so I don't get to go to the elementary side in morning arrival. But my direction, my SRO goes one way, checks a set of doors. I go the other way. I start checking doors, and then we cross paths, and I end up in elementary. There's no better feeling than walking through an elementary school and those kids excited to see you too, because they didn't see you when they first walked in. And so when you want to talk about building confidence, go do the work that you asked some other people to do. I'm not a leader who's going to ask somebody to do something that I was unwilling to do. And for me to push a broom after a high school basketball game to get the dust off the floor because somebody else was cleaning the bleachers, for me to grab a mop because I stand in the front foyer. I know where every closet is. I know where the sinks are. I know how to run a mop bucket. To teach a kid because they spilled an entire Coke on the floor, on a tile floor, how to learn how to do a mop and squish out all the extra water. Those are learning experiences. But it's not beneath me to pick up a piece of trash or to take a trash bag out after an event to the dumpster or to sweep the floor, to mop the floor, or to put my arm around somebody who's struggling and on that particular day to say, you know what, it's going to get better.
Thank you. Number 3, have you been successful in getting strong parental and community support for your school programs or district? And the answer to that is likely going to be yes. So if you would tell us about one such success.
Well, I tried to downplay it last year, and maybe I shouldn't because it may have made bigger news. And again, I am surrounded by people that are way better than me. I'm blessed to be surrounded by so many people who want it better. The experience that I'm going to share with you is last year, I believe it was December 15th. It's not 2023, it would have been 2022. We had what was called, so in my community, I am the largest employer. I interviewed because I wanted to be the cornerstone or the focal point of all the communities in my area. Yes, the fire department has a community center, but I have a plethora of space that I can allow people to use, whether it be a small gym, a large gym, a cafeteria, a library, those types of things. I want everything that goes on in that community that involves kids to be in my building. That building does not belong to me. That building belongs to the taxpayers. I don't own the building. I pay taxes towards that building because I live in that community right now. But it's called Christmas on the Hill. Hollow Rock Brewston Central High School is known as the Hill. And so we just came up with this thing called Christmas on the Hill. It was a Wednesday night that we pulled off the biggest Christmas festivity activity. Again, I took advantage of a holiday that most people love and most people celebrate. We decked that school out. Every kid would participate. Almost every church canceled their Wednesday night activities because they had to be a part of Christmas on the Hill. I can't tell you how many people came to that school, but it was packed because we had such things as a cookie making station. We had such things as popcorn balls. We had such things as including the band and playing music. We had such things as games and activities. We had a nativity scene put on by a church. Yes, all those things happened in my school, and I'm okay with that. We had people handing out coats. A church handed out coats. A different church handed out gloves and hats and new socks because you know what? Just like a kid being hungry, if you got wet feet, you're not going to learn very well. And we took an idea, planted a seed that what if we brought the whole community, who sometimes is divided because of politics, we try to create a unifying event. And I can't tell you that people from other communities heard about it. When some of my maintenance supervisor would tell you that I probably should have went to jail because we might have broke a fire code or 2 or 10, but that place was lit up and it was so amazing that every kid got to experience it and almost every kid probably got to participate in some way. And so when you want to talk, that's probably the biggest event that I can share right now to date, that I had one of the biggest impacts, or I felt like I was a part of one of the biggest impacts, but I didn't do it alone. I had a lot of great people who wanted to see that happen because, again, you have to remember, I'm coming off the pandemic when every door was shut. We closed down hallways. We closed down schools. We didn't allow them to come eat with their kids. We didn't allow them to come be in the classrooms with their kids and to help teachers. And so it was easy to open those doors and it became an amazing event. But I can't tell you the thousands of people who came through my school.
Thank you.
Now, how do you deal with parents who want to come and help teach it?
As an elementary principal, I had what was called classroom moms or classroom dads. I'm not opposed to that. But I would suggest to you that if you're a volunteer in my district, you have to pass a background check. It is a DCS background check. It's not like a staff background check. A staff, you have to go through the TBI because that's what the policy says. But I have any volunteer who goes on an overnight trip with like a club or a sport, and you're staying with kids that aren't your kids, you have to have a background check. Same with us inside of school. If you're going to become a regular volunteer, if you're just going to come have lunch with your kid and one time go to a Christmas party, listen, we open up our buildings. Christmas time, Valentine's, we have celebrations. I know classrooms do that and kids love that and teachers do too. Don't have a problem with that. Again, there's a lot to be learned from those experiences. But if you're going to become a regular volunteer, one of the things that we have implemented this year is at each board meeting, we recognize a volunteer of the month. One of the things I would love to get to is that we have the volunteer of the year through TSBA. I've never experienced that as a director. I have experienced it as a supervisor of SPED from a previous district who had that, because then that gains you recognition at the TSBA conference. And again, you get to highlight somebody in your community who did something extraordinary in your schools. And so I'm not opposed to volunteers, but I would also say this, that isn't going to go through my office. That's going to go through the principal. There is a chain of command. I shouldn't be the first call of a parent if they've not talked to the teacher first and the principal first. So when you're going to a volunteer, just a simple thing like a volunteer, I would always just suggest that a parent reach out to the teacher or the principal and say, hey, how can I become a volunteer? There are parents who can benefit classrooms, but I would also say that if you're going to be a distraction or your kid's going to be distracted with you volunteering, then let's find another opportunity for you. I don't want to close the door and say no, because you know what? You might be able to be helpful somewhere else. Maybe just not that classroom, especially if your kid's in it.
Well, as a leader with successful experiences, that's what we're looking for in strategic planning, instruction, and curriculum development. And you have a major responsibility in developing a school district strategy plan.
So last year, I guess, 2 years ago, we created the roadmap to 2027. So a 5-year plan. I laid out my 5 objectives. That was academic excellence, educator excellence, learning environment excellence, operational excellence, and stakeholder excellence. Those are the 5 main strategies on that. Okay. But within that academic, if you don't start planting seeds and you don't start trying to get better by throwing out numbers or throwing out situations, then you're never going to get to the level you wanted to. You have to take on the brutal facts that sometimes we're just not good in that area. And so within the academic excellence, we came up with the 7 pillars or the 7 keys to college and career readiness. And they read as such. Number 1, all students will be proficient at or above grade level in ELA by the end of 3rd grade. Number 2, all students will be proficient at or above grade level in math by the end of 4th grade. Number 3, all students will be proficient at or above grade level in both ELA and math by the end of 6th grade. So you catch up those that may have fell behind. Number 4, all students will meet the benchmarks for the ACT Aspires college readiness by the end of 8th grade. So now you've got elementary and you've got some middle school. Now let's talk about high school. Number 5, all students who want to go to college will score 27 or higher on the ACT. Number 6, all students will be fluent in financial literacy upon graduation. And number 7, all students will participate in advanced placement, dual enrollment, dual credit, military preparation, industry certs, or work-based learning before they graduate. That's what things like that. I'm not suggesting that's what your plan has, but I'm sure you have some things that are big asks within your school system, but that's what mine talks about. And again, if you don't plant those seeds and you don't strive for that kind of excellence, All is a big word. It's only 3 letters, but it's a big word. I would love to be at 100% proficient. I would love to be able to say the state of Tennessee that we had no 3rd graders being retained or 4th graders. The push now, and I think you're going to see some legislative pieces on this, is now they're trying to back it up. They don't want 3rd grades too late. The talk on Wednesday when the commissioner presented to the hearing was, we're now talking 1st or 2nd grade. That's going to cause some anxiety in 1st and 2nd grade teachers. Because what tests do we have available to us? I know back in the day we had SAT 10, but there's other benchmarking opportunities that we can use. But again, we've got to develop a plan that has excellence attached to it so that our teachers, our students, our parents, and our community all strive for those things.
Well, think back to your elementary days. What sort of expertise in elementary curriculum instruction were you involved with?
I would suggest as an elementary principal, I was so green, so I didn't have an opportunity to be an assistant principal, to be honest. Okay. I went straight from a teacher, got called in the superintendent's office, you're taking on the largest elementary school, because I had built that community support around that extreme makeover in my volunteer program. And so my experience, if I were to have to do it again today, would look much different than 2008 to 2015. Because again, you talk about drinking from a fire hose. And I would say this, that if you went to Prospective Superintendent's Academy, that they would say, don't become a director of schools if you've never been a school principal, because you don't know how to drink from a fire hose. Because as Dr. McCord's having to live it right now, every day somebody's got something to say. And every director has to deal with that. And you never know where it's going to hit you from. It doesn't always have to be weather related. It may be something completely that's just way out there in left field that somebody has a concern about. And you got to be prepared for that question or that concern. And so I would suggest to you as a principal, the simple things that I did was held every 4.5 weeks, because RTI was coming on board at that time. That was a word that honestly we didn't understand a lot of back in 2008, 2009. Fortunately, I was able to hire an assistant principal who was way more smarter than me in elementary. I always wanted to be an elementary school teacher. Never got to be an elementary school teacher. They made me a middle school teacher, but I would never take back those experiences that I had. But being an elementary principal afforded me the opportunity that every 4.5 weeks we would meet with grade level teams and discuss what students are struggling in the classroom, whether it be behavior related, whether it be grade related. I would suggest to you that I had meetings, especially with 4th and 5th grade. There are people with philosophies that kids ought to fail. My philosophy is that how come we can't use the power of I? That I is called an incomplete. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't hold kids accountable, and we held these kids accountable in elementary school, but that we shouldn't hold these kids accountable. They should be held accountable by doing their work and being responsible for completing the task. I'm not going to tell a teacher they can't take a few points off, but a 0 impacts a child's grade mightily. And I think it's said that 1-0, you have to earn 9 100s to even get back to possible, is how I learned that. So I had teachers who wanted to just give a 0. They didn't turn in their homework. Did you review the homework? No, I just didn't turn it in. Well, why would I turn in homework if you're not going to review it? What's the purpose of homework if you're not going to review it, other than to try to drive home that I'm in charge, that I'm the teacher, and I'm just going to fail you? Guess what you do to kids who have struggling home lives, that don't have parents who value education, that you continue to give a 0 to? Guess what? They become problems. They have behaviors because you know what? They don't care, because you don't care as a teacher. And so we had those conversations about the power of I. Put an incomplete. We won't give them a grade, even though the report card will reflect an I instead of an A, B, C, D, or F, or a standard. We will put an I there so that even though they're going to complete that task, but it may be a little later. Take some points off. I'm okay with that part of it. But how are kids going to ever complete a task or learn to complete a task if we don't hold them accountable? Think about our work environments. Sometimes we get behind, don't we? We procrastinate and we don't get it done as fast as we wish. but we still got to complete that task if we want to get paid. And then I would just suggest that, the use of our PTO meetings, again, the homework nights, the PTO nights, to be able to share with parents who attended, and or other meeting nights, to be able to share some of that data that was important. Again, I was young. I would do it completely different now with the resources and the things I have learned in the last 16 years being in leadership.
We'll talk to you a little bit about dealing with the school board, the ability to work with the school board and the school board to be able to work with you. It's comes with a lot of nuances, I know, but making clear decisions and recommendations, of course, it's very paramount in that. Question number 1 says, explain what you have done to build and maintain a good relationship with your board.
So I would suggest the weekly communication in terms of the good news on the Hill is one aspect, because here's the thing is that so the first thing that I did when I came on board was I set a time to meet with each of my board members. And just like that activity I shared earlier where I asked you what you liked, what you didn't like, I afforded every board member to come in and sit with me for an hour, 2 hours, whatever it took. And I wanted you just to tell me from your perspective what you liked, what you didn't like. Because you know what? Each one of you as board members might have something different. Some of you may have similarities of concerns that you have or things you love. And so by opening that door, it allowed me to understand you better as a person, and I understand my board members better. I also had your phone number so that in an emergency situation, one of the worst things that I feel like that a board can deal with is that the community knows it before you. That's frustrating. And in small communities and large communities, sometimes that information can spread like wildfire and you get caught off guard. And so my board, if it's important, or I think they need to know, I send them a group text. Everybody knows at the exact same time, all 7 of my board members. Because you know what? If there's an ambulance or 3 police cars on the front of my property, you probably ought to know that so that I got it under control. Because in my community, if there's an ambulance and police cars, there may be something going on. That's a rarity, and that's why you need to get a text about that. If I know that school was going to be canceled, or there was a student who had a seizure, or something else took place that I felt like was important, then that would be a text. Because it's faster than a phone call. I can always follow up with a phone call to be able to explain in detail. But just like I would trust all of my staff to be doing what they're supposed to be doing, I'm not a micromanager. I think that's what my staff love about me, is that I trust that they're in the profession and doing what they're supposed to be doing. I don't go in peeking indoors. I would hope that you would trust your next director of schools as being able to lead his or her district. And so if it is a text, if it is a phone call, if it's an email, if it's something that, you know what, there's 4 or 5 things I just want to I just want to alert you on, that would just be an email. That's not a 911. But again, trying to keep you informed, just because I do weekly communication doesn't mean I communicate. That's the only time I communicate. There is a multitude of ways that you can communicate, and I have in my 2.5 years and in my experience to be able to communicate. I would also say that I intentionally invite board members to certain functions. You know, it's easy to put it out on Facebook. Hey, join us at 7:30 tonight for this or that. But for you to get an intentional invite means there was some personalization to it. And I think that's important because it means that somebody took the time to make that invitation or to write, hey, please join me.
Thank you for that. Briefly, tell us how you would keep up with educational research and initiatives to assist us with preparing options and what have you for our board to make these decisions on.
I would suggest to you networking with other director of schools is important to me. Right now, I meet with all Northwest on the last Friday of each month. I think that in this area, it's called Mid-Cumberland. So there are those groups where director of schools that do meet and be able to talk about different strategies and different things. We also share out what's upcoming in terms of legislative. That's very important. I would say the use of TSBA and the resources. Right now, I use Jennifer White. She's the one, when we pass a policy, I send it to Jennifer White the very next morning. 2 days later, she emails it to me and all my board members that policy has now been updated online, because it's important that you know that gets updated and those are reviewed annually. And sometimes some get overlooked because they're not always the ones that stick out. And so I constantly look for the ones that are dated and just to try to update, because again, this shows that we as a body have reviewed those and the language is consistent with what TSBA has in their templates.
You kind of answered question 3 as well, but if there's anything else you want to add to it as far as how you would work with the board to be effective and make good decisions and be respected as the board and community.
The only thing I'll add is to be respected. I probably missed this earlier, was at those events, there are times when it's important that I recognize those board members in attendance. There are certain events that certain people ought to be recognized at for being in attendance, because you know what? Sometimes the community only sees you as making decisions from the board side, whether they like them or don't like them, whether they agree or disagree. But to see you at an event where children are singing, a band's playing, a club is putting on some volunteer activity and you're there and there's an opportunity for me just to welcome people. Again, I'm not trying to stop an activity just to be like, oh, hey, let me introduce X person, okay? But I think that there are opportunities that you talk about being respected. You know, there are certain county officials and or board members, there's opportunity to be able to be recognized for being in attendance. And I think that helps with that respect piece, because a lot of times I think that we take it for granted that you've shown up for 15 events, but we've never even said 2 things about it. And a lot of the community don't know who you are because you don't represent that district per se, or they didn't watch the meetings. That's the only thing I would add.
Mr. Hagley?
With your current board, do y'all meet you mentioned your strategic plan earlier, do y'all meet on an annual basis, whether it be a retreat or a planning session to work together on that strategic plan? Do you utilize board input in that strategic plan?
So the time that we built our 5-year plan, I conducted it in one 3-hour meeting. It was open to the public. We strategically invited parents, community members, and then every board member was asked to be in attendance. I think 6 out of the 7 of mine were in attendance when we developed that. We do not meet annually. I have been part of districts where we did meet annually. My first experience, and I was not even in administration, but they went to Gatlinburg for a weekend. And I don't know what took place because I never participated, but that was their board retreat. They would talk about whatever they were talking about. In my supervisory experience, I would suggest it was a day, roughly 8 to 4. There was a time for a lawyer to come in and talk about anything that was legal, any legal matters. That was closed session, obviously, for anything that was going on within the district. But then it was open for any of the director had strategically asked certain people to do presentations for the board in terms of a direction that they were going within that. But I would suggest that by strategic plan, after we passed it last year, that I also worked at each of the board meetings to try to review one of those. Because here's the thing is, you can create a plan and put it on the shelf. You're never going to get anywhere with that plan. What's important is that if you're going to create a strategic plan, right, again, we may not meet all the objectives. That's why it's called a 5-year plan. Some of those things may take up to 5 years and some may take longer. Some may be done in the first month. I wouldn't suggest that everything be done in the first month, because that's not a good 5-year plan. That was an easy plan. And so I would suggest to you that it's important that those get reviewed in a public forum like a board meeting, and do one at a time so that the length of that meeting doesn't have to go longer and longer. Thank you.
Describe your experiences managing multiple projects at a time and the strengths that you bring to that.
I'm currently in that situation. I have a baseball, softball field house being built. I have an old playground that had to be removed. I'm trying to get an intercom system updated. I have all new cameras coming in the next few weeks. Those are just a couple of the projects that I would say that I have to have my ear tuned to, but I also have other people that meet, when they do those inspections or when they go do those walkthroughs. My maintenance supervisor will obviously serve as, one of the leads on that, but I have to stay in tune to that because, one, it costs money. Anything over $25,000, I have to have approved by my board. And so it's important for me to be invested in those projects because some of those projects do cost more than that, obviously. And it's important that if I know that there's going to be a 10% increase on the price that I'm making you aware of that as a board, because that could potentially be more than $25,000 more. And you may have questions. Why did that rate go up? I need to have answers before I even present that, because I'm not saying cost of materials can't go up. But if it was something on our end, a delay or something we did, that would be a problem. It may be a structural issue that we're just going through old walls or dealing with old materials that now have to be updated because of this particular project. So I'm currently doing those projects right now along with day-to-day operations and showing up each day. And so I know that isn't a brand new school. I don't need a brand new school right now. We've got a lovely school. It's effective for the students in that community. But those are projects that sometimes have to be considered when you talk about big time capital projects and what those asks are going to be. But those executive meetings, that maintenance person has to be at the table. Those principals in the admin meetings have to be at the tables because, again, if you're an effective communicator, they know some of those answers so that when the staff or the parents are asking questions, they should be able to answer the same way I answer.
Thank you. What do you consider the top 3 assets for helping schools with achievement levels, and what does that look like?
The best principals, the teachers in the right seat, including instructional coaches, and professional development utilized with a big intention. We used to do what's called lunch and learns. We used to, we have 5-6 days at the beginning of the calendar. Usually have a day in January. You'll have a couple days in the spring that are called professional development or admin days. If you're not best utilizing those things and those days, then you're wasting time when it comes to instructional achievement. When I say that, at the beginning of the year, one of the great experiences, again, other people developed it, I got to teach in it though, is that we created this catalog one day at the beginning of the year. And then of course, the day we come back in January, we had 2 intentional half days planned out for all staff, but we would have upwards of 20 presenters. Most of them were in-house. So if it was math related, those math teachers who needed that professional development went to that. And they normally had 2 selections. You would have like a keynote speaker. And so math teachers would go to math. ELA teachers could go to ELA. Technology, if you needed some help. Things that I always took advantage of when I wasn't teaching, I would teach one of the 2 each time, usually around restraint or de-escalation techniques for behaviors. But I would always go to updating a website. I love technology, but I struggle with technology sometimes too, because it's much smarter than I am. But I would always go, how to update your website. I was responsible for updating my special education website. And you know who I wanted to be with when I went to that was the people who knew how to get me on that website. And they would show me one trick, but I was there for an hour and a half only focused on that website design. I would plow through several ideas that I wanted on my website. I'm done. So I think that you have to be intentional with your professional development and meet the teachers with the professional development they need. All right. If it has to do with something with de-escalation or challenging behaviors in a classroom, find the professionals, and you may have them already here. You have behavior specialists. They probably your resource. You don't have to spend $50,000 to bring in John C. Maxwell to speak for 18 minutes. I'm not saying he's not a great speaker. I'm just saying you don't always have to bring in that person that costs a lot of money. A lot of times you have people in our community. Another great one that I had was a person who dealt with estates after somebody passed away, and she titled her presentation "Declutter Your Life." And she talked about her experiences that when somebody died, she'd have to go clean out that house, and how family members were so mad at the person who died because they left them all this junk. And all she taught about was get rid of your junk in your classroom. Get rid of the junk in your life. And so she would talk about the clothes you wear. Take the clothes and wear the clothes you wear this week. Take them after you wash them, turn it around backwards in your closet. And after 6 months, everything that's not turned around, take it and donate it to a thrift store. That's how you declutter your life. That stuff like that. That's simple. That doesn't cause any thought, but makes you think about it from a professional and a personal view.
Thank you. What makes the United States of America the greatest country on earth?
It's the land of the free. It's the home of the brave. My dad was United States Air Force for 21 years. He's retired in South Dakota. All I've ever known is God, family, and country. When I was a kid and probably into a young adult, when the United States competes, no matter what it is, whether it be the Olympics, whether it be some other event, there is no other country that I root for. And I remember as a kid, when the national anthem would play, somebody was receiving the gold medal, I would stand up. I never served. My dad did. My grandparents did. But that's all I've ever known. This is the greatest country in the whole world. And we're reminded every day, because how many times does this country have to go and resolve a problem or help somebody in need? I'm not saying that sometimes we have our own challenges in the United States. I'm not saying that this country is becoming more divided. I was probably too young, not into politics as much as I am now, but in the last 20 years, this country has changed quite a bit. And I've been more in tune to that. And I'm not saying anybody's been right or anybody's been wrong, but I love when this country can unify and go and help people, because that's what we were built upon, was to make a difference for the rest of the world, but also take care of our people.
Thank you. I got one more, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay. You used an example earlier. I believe you was answering one of the questions that I was asking. And your example was you can involve us. That can't make us engage. I'm going to use that example back to you.
Okay.
Are you ready and prepared to become a dragon, a bobcat, a colonel, a tiger, a cougar, and a red hawk, and reside in Dickson County and become Dickson County and become the community of Dickson County? Because we can involve you in Dickson County. We can't make you engage in Dickson County. We can't make you philosophically live in Dickson County. You could always move to Dickson County. But to become a member of our community, to know the community and be the community, be a part of the community. Because our children is the reason that we're all here. It's the reason these people are here. It's the reason that however many people's watching it is because they're worried about our children and our children's future and want what's best for our children.
Correct.
And Dickson is a lot bigger district than you're used to. I'm not saying anything other than Dickson is a big district, but Dickson County's got really deep roots in every community. From one side of it to the other, every middle school has its own community. Each high school has their own traditions. Are you ready and prepared to come and engage in Dickson County?
I'd say the best thing that I did was move to the community that I serve in. Because when I served in Oak Ridge, it was not a requirement for me to live there. And so having children, my wife worked at UT. I worked in Oak Ridge. That's a 45 to 50 minute split. We had a house in the middle in Knoxville. It was difficult to live, work, and play in all those different communities. And I seen that as a struggle because my kids played soccer, or they played basketball, they played baseball, karate, and it was difficult. One of the best things that I could have ever done is move to the community I live. I live 2 minutes from my school. When I say that I live in a glass house, I live near my school, and it's a benefit. I ain't got nothing to hide. And so I would say that my kids and my family have been blessed because we can live, work, and play. My wife works 10 minutes down the road, and she's in Huntington. She's a supervisor of the hospital. So it's not that far. She's still able to manage to be able to come see my kids participate in those things that they choose to. It's important. It was crazy how I got there because I bought a house less than 10 days sight unseen because I had been named and I had to go on that, and my family followed suit. So I think that if you want an effective leader, I know you have 3 internal candidates. Fortunately, I'm not the one who gets to decide this. I got to be able to share my experiences and my experiences and my part of my resume or part of my leadership ability. You 6 individuals get to make that choice and have to deliberate all that. I feel for you all, because you guys have a tough choice. You have 3 members who already live in your community, and that's an opportunity for one of them for sure. You have 1 member who's not a member of your community, and I understand that to be effective, you would have to move to this community and be a part of it because, number one, I want to be the tax-paying citizen who's contributing to my school district. I already am right now. But I also want to shop and eat because that benefits our locals and then benefits our tax structure. Some of that money comes to the school system. That's important that you're out and about doing those kinds of things and being involved in all the different activities that a community has to offer is important because, again, it's not just being visible inside the school. It's being visible outside of the school. That matters to the community, any community, not just Dickson County, but any community, because I don't think you can be an effective leader if you're not willing to live, work, and play in that community.
Thank you.
Covered most of my stuff already.
I've got a couple things. You said you talked to a couple other candidates. Who were they?
Seen Mr. Hawley today and Dr. Sutherland in my introductions here. I congratulated both of them and wished them the very best. I did not get to see Dr. Duke, but I didn't have an opportunity to.
All right. Let me ask you this. Which did you find more? I've noticed several quotes that you have given and several.
You want more?
Excuse me?
You want more?
No. Here's what I'm going to ask you. Was John Maxwell's the 21 irrefutable, laws of leadership, or was it Stephen Covey's 7 habits that affected you the most?
Oh, I would say Maxwell.
Maxwell did.
He's
amazing.
I'm reading a book right now, How to Develop Future Leaders. And one thing I never spoke on, but it's part of my resume, is I was one part of the team that built the Future Leader Academy. You talk about grow your own. We were growing our own before they had grow your own. And I'm not saying that internal candidates aren't sometimes the best candidates, but how are you ever going to know who wants to get into leadership if you're not offering classes? And me and my executive director, again, I can't take all the credit, but we formulated an application and took 8 to 10 members of our community, our school community, and said, you're interested in leadership? Let's share with you some of the things you're going to have to deal with. Let's talk about a concept. And we use Maxwell probably more than anybody, because here's the thing. Not everybody's built for leadership. Not everybody's built to drink from a fire hose, because here's the thing. You get in a meeting and have a camera sitting in front of you, you start sweating, hiving up, splotchy, crying. Don't bode well. Okay. Some people are built for leadership and some
But
people
would
are
you
built.
agree that everybody can learn to be a good leader?
Everybody can learn. And if you don't have the ability to learn, then you're dead.
Because we've got all these seminars to teach us and books to teach us how to be a good leader. So
Be better each day.
that's right.
And even when students struggle with their discipline and have a consequence, I always used to tell them when I had to suspend them as a principal, I said, tomorrow's a new day. Let's come make that a better day.
Any other follow-up questions? Thank you for being here. Do you have any closing comments you would like to make?
I just want to thank you. I know it's getting late. You all have the toughest decision you have to make because you six get the vote. The people behind me, the people watching on TV, the people that are putting on Facebook or wherever, any social media, or, they may have a voice. And I would just encourage you to listen to those voices. They may have some insight that maybe you didn't catch on that. And I think mannerisms, I think first impressions, I think professionalism, I think experiences all matter in this particular decision because you all have some challenges, just like every district has challenges, but you also have some great things that are going on. And so I would say that this was a great learning opportunity for me. I came here tonight with a goal to learn from you while you learn from me. Because here's the thing is you can get comfortable in a place and stay comfortable, but are you learning? And I've just always been, why be comfortable when you can be better? And that's what I'll end with. I just appreciate your all's time tonight. Good luck in your decision. If I can help in any way, you please reach out to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Board members, do we want to pick a date maybe next week to get together after we've had the weekend to think about? Yes.
How does Thursday sound to everybody? I really think you're going to have challenges on Tuesday and possibly Wednesday.
Do we have this county commission Tuesday night?
It's a question of will they have a county commission Tuesday night, but
Or not? Well, I don't.
I didn't check.
I'm open all
Right,
right.
I think so too.
Which it shouldn't take long for us. I don't.
It shouldn't. You're correct.
We're looking at Thursday night.
I'm okay with Tuesday.
I'm okay with Tuesday or Thursday. I can't do Monday.
So
Tuesday, I think we just talk about the weather, right, Steve?
Right.
That was my application.
Oh, okay.
Not complications with anything other than the weather.
That was my application. Yeah,
So we're looking at
Thursday the 18th,
18th. That's
the week
6.
for the next week.
6 o'clock.
That works for me. 6 work.
I'd like to have that time first of the week for some referral reviews and some.
We want to advertise that as
I think we need to, don't you? Or do
as
you?
a special meeting.
Finalize down to 2 or whatever we're going to do. It has to be advertised as a special call meeting. Take an action.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
need to
advertise,
advertise. 6 on Thursday night.
Yes.
Okay.
18th.
I'll get her to advertise it.
118 6.
And then we're meeting again the next week. As
That's the regular board meetings to the 25th.
25th.
Don't get the other money for the fund of some, but we won't be selling only in a week.
That would be for the, I guess, specific purpose of consideration of the director of schools.
Yes. All right, we can adjourn.
Thank you.